the man himself, Mark Sleboda, international relations and security analyst. How you doing today, Mark? You doing okay?
Tomorrow, I'm alive. How are you? Thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on the show.
Well, I am also alive, as far as I know, Mark, and I'm always glad to have you, man. I guess I have to start at the apartment complex bombing. What is going on with that? I'm just seeing that this morning. What happened? I mean, are they expecting? Like I said, I just saw the story this morning. They were saying at least one person's killed in a blast at Elite Elye Perusa residential complex. What are they thinking? This is a terrorist assault?
Yeah. Okay. So this is something that has happened hundreds and hundreds of times over in this conflict. It was a targeted assassination by method of a bombing, which by definition makes it a terrorist attack because it was meant to target one particular individual, but obviously it at least injured other people as well, and was obviously meant as explosion like this as a demonstration meant to instill political fear. The intended target of it was a native of the Donbass, of what had been eastern Ukraine, Armen Sarkisyan, who was the founder of the Arbat battalion, one of the Donbass battalions that has fought against the Kiev regime since the West-backed Maidan Putsch in 2014, and later became part of Russian forces. Now, Sarkisyan has not been active as a commander of the Arbat in some time. He retired from the conflict years ago because this is more than a decade conflict for many people on both sides. But he is just one of hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of East Ukrainian or former East Ukrainian, they now identify as Russian, leaders, political leaders, activists, battalion leaders, figures at all levels of society that the Kiev regime considers traitors to their West-backed Putsch regime, and to their nation of what Ukraine is and should be. And of course, Sarkisyan was on the Mirotvorets kill list, the Kiev regime's official, unofficial kill list curated by the Interior Ministry of Ukraine.
Wow. So, there you are. Oh, okay. I wasn't sure. I'm sorry. I thought you were continuing with I thought you had more to say with that.
The founder was killed. I mean, Sarkisyan was killed. He was initially reported as alive. He was, in critical condition, receiving treatment. Evidently, his leg had been blown off, but then he died in care. And there are 3 other people in what I understand is very serious injury. And this was a residential complex, a rather nice place. And they went off in the elevator lobby. So we don't know who the 3 other people are, but it's very likely that they are residents of the building. And again, this is just something that has happened hundreds and hundreds of times over. It is barely reported in the Western media. And when it is reported, it's reported with they deserved it because they were collaborators kind of air, right?
Yeah,
I mean, that's the way this is always reported when these former East Ukrainians are killed by the Kiev regime because they collaborated with the enemy.
That's astonishing. Yeah, that's astonishing. And you're right. That is the way it's reported in the Western media anyway, when they mention it. I want to get to Zelensky for a bit, or let's say the Trump administration. So it seems that the Trump administration has started to push Zelensky to get into elections. effectively saying, hey, maybe you need to hold an election because that's what democracies actually do. And we keep saying that Ukraine is a democracy, which is kind of laughable at this point, but whatever. We've had elections during wars. I mean, we had an election during the Civil War. So what is your excuse for why you can't necessarily have an election? Now, I would imagine, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, if the US, basically its primary funder is telling it, go have an election, on some level, he has to go have an election, correct? Well, you
We'll
don't buy
see.
it.
We will see. We will see how things develop. I would consider this a positive data point, right? But we have heard rumors of the U.S. forcing Kiev regime to hold, Zelensky to hold elections multiple times over years now. Now that has been under Biden, so it's a different story. First of all, let me say, the salient, point of this issue is that Zelensky's term as quote unquote president of the Kiev regime has expired back last spring. And he has held presidential powers ever since by continuing emergency powers under emergency laws conditions, right? So it just keeps extending his powers every 30 days, and then he renews them, declares that there's still a national emergency, and that is how he's continuing. The Russian government, with at least Putin's reading of the Ukrainian constitution, is that this is illegal, according particularly to some former Ukrainian Supreme Court decisions, constitutional court decisions. Now, the Western media largely just stays completely clear of this. They just don't address this issue whatsoever, right? It doesn't concern them, right?
It doesn't come up.
They don't really care. Ukraine has been christened a democracy, right? A freedom and all of that. And so that issue is never to be revisited. Now, my personal opinion is that Ukraine has not been a democracy since the Western-backed putsch that overthrew the last legitimate democratically elected government in Ukraine in 2014. And any, quote, elections that have been held that elected Zelensky, they did so with all the parties of Eastern Ukraine being successively lustrated, pogromed, and outright banned from existence. All parties representing the views of people of East Ukraine and all leftist parties in the country. Essentially, the only legitimate parties left are Maidan parties, right? That the course of the country since the Maidan, and nothing else. No other political force is allowed to challenge that, right? First, the Party of Regions was lustrated and driven out of existence, and then within a few years, when they had managed to reorganize as the opposition bloc, and they threatened to become the most popular party in the country, their leader was charged with treason, as numerous opposition party leaders were, and the party was then outright banned and dissolved as well. So, I mean, this happens, repeatedly. That Maidan course is not to be revisited democratically, whether the Ukrainian people would like to or not. Right. That's the end all be all. So I never considered any of the elections since 2014 in the country as legitimate. That being said, this is very interesting because Putin has been stressing this point that, even if we began negotiations and let's say we actually came to an agreement, which I find rather hard to believe, but that anything that Zelensky signed wouldn't be worth the paper that it was printed on for numerous reasons, right? Considering past history, but now especially since, a future Ukrainian administration could just say, he wasn't the legal president, right? Citing the very same reasons that Putin did. And therefore, we don't have to even pretend to pay attention to whatever we agreed to in this. And this is the most interesting point, because the U.S. government, either under the Biden administration or up till now, we haven't heard it out of the Trump clique. Now the administration, we haven't heard them bring up this, right? Not openly like this, and this means that they're listening to what Russia is saying. That's fascinating, right? Russia is saying this. We don't know whether Russia is saying this direct to them. There's a question of how much actual discussion is going on. Trump has said outright multiple times that we are in talks with the Russians. Right. The Russians, meanwhile, say there is no high-level talks between the U.S. and Russia at all. Right. And we just had, a senior Russian diplomat stress that again over the last few days. So they've said anything that is happening is happening at the embassy level. And there's still not a Russian ambassador in the United States because the U.S. refuses to go about the process of approving the new one. Yeah, including now under Trump. Now, we can hope that will change, but it hasn't so far. There's a question, but certainly they're talking at each other through the public, through the media, through social media. There is definitely at the least an exchange of views. And now for the first time, this is an indication that they're listening. It also means one further thing, right? It means that the Trump administration, that Trump wants Zelensky gone.
Yes.
Right. Automatically, because there's no question on anyone's mind. No one has any real question that if elections, quote unquote, were held in Ukraine and they were under any modicum affair, if you put a blind, mute, and deaf donkey on the ballot next to Zelensky, the blind, mute, and deaf donkey would win the election. Right. I mean, that's the condition.
And a landslide.
That's how loved Zelensky is in Ukraine right now. And we've heard people refer to him, including Tucker Carlson recently, among others. And we know that Tucker Carlson, he's not a official part of the Trump administration, but he's definitely in the same vein and has influence on them, and he's outright correctly, but although not mentioning all the reasons why, just referring to this expiration of his office, but referred to Zelensky as a dictator. He's a tin pot banderite fascist dictator. I mean, that's what he rules over. So this is interesting. This is the Trump administration saying, yeah, we don't like Zelensky. We never liked him. He was always friendly with our Democratic opposition. And he was, his administration was ultimately involved in trying to prevent me from running again. Maybe not they might have been involved in his impeachment attempt in the United States as well. But they're also it may be more than just personal like that, right? But for Donald Trump, I think that's probably the end all be all. That is personal. But beyond that, there may be a recognition also that he is simply an absolute obstacle to talks. I mean, we still, Simon Schuster is still referring to him, according to his own officials, as delusional. Right. I mean, that happened, back in the autumn of 2023. But
Time Magazine article,
report, again, they described him this way. So, they consider that he is just living in his own reality. The literally the emperor with no clothes, covered in blood. And there's a recognition that if there is any Kiev regime to be saved, right, which that means that Donald Trump negotiations are going to be required to save it, backed by Donald Trump, which is why I hope that negotiations don't succeed at all, because I don't want this regime to continue in any way, shape, or form. And unfortunately, any elections, quote unquote, head by this regime whether Zelensky wins or not, and I presume he will not, by the rules of this election that outlaws all the political opposition of East Ukraine and all leftist opposition in the country, that still means we're just going to get another Maidan SOB in there. Maybe Poroshenko comes back, maybe Zaluzhny, maybe Budanov, who knows, some crazy Banderite or someone who is sympathetic to them and will ultimately become one himself, just like Poroshenko and Zelensky both eventually did, right? Because that's the nature of the regime. So I really hope, first of all, I see no reason why any type of peace negotiation brokered by the U.S. will succeed. All right, the Kiev regime is against it. The Europeans are against it, right? The ultra nationalists, the Banderite fascists who still are the core of the Kiev regime's military forces that are capable and willing to fight. All the security services, their quote unquote political parties, everything. They're run through it, and they will not accept a peace settlement. Right? They just won't. They will fight and to the death of every last Ukrainian. Right? Not only including themselves. If they can push someone out in front first, they most likely will. But I believe they would fight to that as well. Maybe not Zelensky himself. I mean, he's obviously not a fighter. He would flee to Brooklyn or Miami or wherever, right? But I don't see the U.S. presenting any deal that the Russians would accept at this point. And I don't see how any U.S. president, even Trump, no matter what he thinks of Zelensky and Ukraine, could accept Russian terms, because they would be surrender terms, right? Because Russia rightly believes they have won this conflict, right? I mean, it's delivered. It's not signed, sealed, and delivered yet, right? But, there is no battlefield way, right? Current trends continuing, and there's no real reason to believe that they could be altered, right? Other than fantastical hopium beliefs that after 3 years of 24,000 plus sanctions, the next month will be the one that breaks the back, and it will all come crumbling down finally. I mean, that's the only belief that the fantasists who still believe or want to believe, right, in a Kiev regime victory, or at least a non-total defeat that they can count on. That's it. And I think they're completely wrong. And I live here, so I do see a bit of how the economy is functioning on a daily basis, and almost nothing that is printed in the Western media is true, right? It's just completely false. There is moderate inflation, which again, all Western countries are suffering to one degree or another now, and have for years, and that alone, which is already being tamed by central bank measures, is just it is a complete hopium fantasy to believe that this is some type of fatal Achilles heel wound or something like that. It's just complete nonsense. So I just don't, even with all of this, I still don't see any peace negotiations succeeding, because Russia has too much to gain and too much to lose by peace negotiations. No matter what, forget Zelensky never agreeing to this, and political turmoil in Ukraine, and all of the European elite majors, at least in the UK and France and Germany, lining up and saying, we'll continue, we'll double down, we need to spend more. Patriot missiles now being sent from Israel to Ukraine, with the U.S. as a quick intermediary, which quite obviously Trump did not choose to. At least, this was begun under the Biden administration.
Right.
But you have to believe that Trump now would have the ability, if he so chose, to stop that. And Macron is all ready to send the Mirage 2000, which is kind of a joke of an aircraft, to be perfectly honest, right? And not quite as bad as the F-35, but they're getting rid of them, and they're getting rid of them by giving them to Ukraine, right? I mean, they were already mothballed, right? But now they're going to send them to Ukraine. They'll be almost as effective as the F-16s have been for Ukraine, which is, crickets chirping. But that being said, there's one of the Scandinavian countries just signed off on another 1.2 billion of military aid over the last week. All signs are that the Europeans are not ready to throw in the towel yet, right? No one is convinced. No one in Kiev is convinced. And there still is a lot of belief in the U.S. Congress, right? In the proxy war in Ukraine. Now,
it doesn't work that way here.
Donald Trump steamroll his way over that? I don't know. I mean, let's take a look ultimately at what happens. I mean, the nominations of RFK Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard haven't gone through yet, right?
Not yet.
Not yet.
And to be honest, both of those are going to be very close. And that is, but see, that has more to do than Trump, though. I mean, RFK, Tulsi Gabbard are uniquely hated by Democrats because they used to be Democrats.
Well, so is Trump uniquely hated by Democrats as a whole,
Yeah.
as well as by a number of neocon Republicans, right?
That is true.
And
that is true.
For the nomination of Hegseth, if I believe correctly, right, a figure whom I think you'll agree is at least less controversial with Republicans, other Republicans, than RFK Jr. or certainly Tulsi Gabbard. It required J.D. Vance as the vice president to come to the floor to vote to break the tie and get Hegseth through, which tells me right away that there's a lot more opposition. The entire pharmaceutical industry and all of the politicians it owns, including, as RFK Jr. pointed out, Bernie Sanders.
Including Bernie Sanders.
Including Bernie Sanders.
Bernie Sanders.
Nice burn there by RFK Jr., by the way. No. If you saw that video.
I did see it, yeah. Because it's funny. I mean, Sanders is so full of it. He's so full of it. I know this is a segue, but it's like, dude, when they're having these congressional hearings, they already know what they're going to say. They already know what they're going to do. They know what they're going to vote. The stuff is just scripted.
It's performative.
Yeah, it's pure performative. And so it's like, the idea that you're standing behind Joe Biden as the most progressive president since FDR, but RFK is your issue. Yeah. It's like, get out of here. Just get out of here.
And Tulsi Gabbard has an even less chance of being approved. And I saw, I'm not going to say I saw the entire thing, but I very assiduously watched clips from Tulsi Gabbard's nomination.
She's fantastic.
And she is so formidable. She is so formidable. And that's why they can never let her approval go through.
One of the wild pieces in that clip that blew me away, and blew me away is not the right word for it. It's shocking because it brings into alignment what is U.S. policy for real. Not what they say, not the Levin light, not we believe in democracies and rainbows, not that. Like bare bones. And the guy pointed out, he says, hey, it sounds like you were saying similar things that Putin was saying, and sometimes even Iran. And Tulsi pointed out, like, dude, we are supporting terrorists in these governments. I fought for this country. I was literally in Iraq fighting for this country. And now you've put in the people in power in Syria, or we're backing the exact same people that I effectively was fighting. He says, yeah, this is disgusting. How on earth can you,
Putin says that. So even if it's true, it's bad.
Exactly. It was that part, right? And he was like, he says, yeah, but, and Russia said it. And it's like, dude, did you just hear what I said to you? Like, I literally pointed out to you that we are literally backing terrorists. And his response is, yeah, but why did you say it?
Yeah, I mean, she said, I've been called Putin's puppet. I've been called Assad's puppet. I've been called Trump's puppet. At the end of the day, you're really, I'm paraphrasing her, your real problem is that I'm not your puppet.
Pretty much. It's that. It's that. And for Democrats, her going after Hillary Clinton and all of this, the warmongers, as she calls them, the woke warmongers, yeah, they take issue with that stuff. And Democrats predominantly take issue with that stuff, even more than Republicans.
Personal, emotional level. I don't, first of all, on an analytic level, I can't see how Tulsi Gabbard could ever be approved. Right. I just don't believe it will happen. I mean, we can talk recess appointment, whether that would be, how useful that would be to Trump, so forth. But on a simple emotional, personal level, I do not want to see Tulsi Gabbard approved.
Really?
Because then it might force me to have some hope. And hope is the death of analysis.
Gotta kill my hope.
We talked about this. We've talked about this before. And let me just say that as a journalist, hope is entirely acceptable. In fact, I mean, there's a whole, vein of political journalism, right? Activist journalism, whatever you want to call it. So that is entirely fine and acceptable, and in some cases even laudable, right? We need that, right? But as an analyst, and I primarily consider myself an analyst, not a journalist, hope is the death of analysis, right? Hope is the death of that cold-blooded objectivity that is needed to assess things. So that's why, because every time I see Tulsi Gabbard take the floor against the entire Senate and intelligence establishment, I start to feel emotionally stirred. And
I love it. Oh, man, I love it. I love it. You have no idea. I love it. And, going to that, just to go back for a moment, we were talking about the election in regards to Zelensky. There was an article, there was a report that came out, I believe this was several weeks ago, that was effectively saying that there were behind the scenes meetings, or at the very least communications with Zelensky to say, hey, if you don't run for office, if you don't push in a political sense, we won't go after you. If you do, however, we may prosecute you and effectively go after you for legal consequences. Okay, fast forward. A few days ago, an article came out that effectively pointed out that Zelensky could be prosecuted for blowing up Nord Stream.
That was laid out long ago. If you'll remember, we talked about it when the Washington Post suddenly started dropping Zelensky's name. Zelensky wasn't involved at all, but Zelensky was, right? Like this whole cockamamie, rando Ukrainians in the SS Minnow, were the ones who blew up this whole CIA, denial cover story, right? Even then, though, there was these little traps laid for Zelensky in all of this, right? Again, though, I have to say now, the conditions have changed because the Biden administration is no longer in charge. And there is no guarantee that the Trump administration would use those levers against Zelensky. And it would be very hard for the Germans or someone to do that on their own. They would be completely directionless in that regard. So that's not as much of a potential obstacle, right, or threat or blackmail as it might have once been. And case in point is the whole propaganda hoax of North Korean soldiers fighting in the special military operation for Russia in the Kursk region, right? The Kiev regime picked it up, and then like almost 2 months later, finally the Western governments were like, yeah, they're there. Yeah, sure they are. And then the Western media is like, yes, they're there, right? And there was zero criticality. There was no analysis. There was never any proof involved. The two soldiers from Yakut that were not Yakut. Where was it? Somewhere
one of the other, yeah,
in Siberia that were caught, and their military documents that identify them as being from East Siberia are obviously fakes. Never mind that they don't even look North Korean in the slightest, right? They must be North Korean, right? And then the Western media is like, okay, yeah, sure, right? There was one single line in all of the Western media I saw that questioned this whole North Korea propaganda hoax, North Korean fighting in the SMO propaganda hoax. And that was a line in BBC. And it wasn't even their own words. They simply quoted from a Kiev regime soldier fighting in the Kursk region who said that, yes, it can be very hard to find a North Korean soldier at night in the dark of the Kursk forests, especially when they're not there. And BBC didn't comment it at all. They didn't say, what does that say? They just left it out there at the very end of the story. But that was the only line that they snuck that by the editors or something because it came from a Ukrainian. But now that story's all gone because the New York Times tells us, the North Korean soldiers have been defeated and Kim Jong-un pulled them all out. They're all gone from the front line, and that's it. We'll never hear from them again, right? I mean, which is to say, we can't trust that Trump will carry through on this hoax the way the Biden administration did, and then the truth will come out, and everyone will have eggs on their faces, right, for this whole propaganda bit. So they gotta shoo the North Koreans away from the spotlight completely now. That whole story, you're never going to hear North Korean soldiers. Now, North Korean equipment, yes, there is actual evidence, right, that Russia is using some North Korean artillery shells, some howitzers, possibly some missiles. I haven't seen any direct evidence of that, but it's certainly plausible, right? There's no question, which I certainly don't care. Every single NATO country and NATO allies like Japan and Israel and South Korea have supplied weapons to the Kiev regime. Why shouldn't Russia, take some supplies from North Korea, right? That's just absurd.
Yeah, I never understood this double standard.
Troops fighting never made any sense. There's zero military operability. They just signed a treaty. They've got no experience working together. They would just be a hindrance. They're not needed. Russia has all the manpower it needs for the moment, right? And that's just it was always obviously a just propaganda, just blatant, not misinformation, but active disinformation.
Yeah.
Right. And the fact that the whole Western media went along with it without once questioning it or examining any evidence or anything, the fact that they just went along it is such a condemnation of them. I mean, I remember when I started, as a young man to doubt the Western media with the whole back to the Iraq war stories. But I mean, all of that was nowhere near the Orwellian level that the entire Western mainstream media is today.
I've never seen anything like it. And like I've told my audience, I felt like I was in a fantasy land when this conflict first started. And it was like the reporting here, they would drop all context. It would be stuff like where Vladimir Putin wants to take over all of Europe with 150,000 troops.
Shovels running out, using refrigerator chips, untrained,
running out of missiles,
rubble, all of these lies from the very beginning. But we're the propagandists, not you, right?
It's outrageous.
Get out of here. I will take our record talking together over anyone and everyone in the Western media over the last 3 years. Let's side that up point by point, and I mean, we'll be so far miles ahead of them in facts and predicting what is happening both militarily and politically that of course that will never happen. So
yeah, we've been far more right. I mean, like they've been laughably wrong
yeah,
all the way through. I mean, the idea that they were making this argument that North Korean soldiers would burn their faces just before
yes,
they died,
yeah,
so they
yeah,
would
they would burn
evidence.
their as they were dying. They would
Yeah.
all burn their faces,
Oh,
or they
oh,
would burn
oh.
each other's faces, so they couldn't properly be identified as North Koreans.
It's so outrageous. It's like, but it's a North Korean government. It's a dictatorship. It's a totalitarian state. So when he tells you to burn your face on your deathbed, you burn your face on your deathbed. It's like, okay, this is outlandish. Now, to be fair, 90% of the media, this was one of the stats that came out, I believe this was last week, 90% of the media in Ukraine was being paid for by the U.S. State Department.
And the funny thing about that is, who does the Western media always refer to?
The Ukrainian
media, right?
Which,
it's all one. And then the politicians, even those that get intelligence briefs, still rely primarily, right? And not all of them get useful intelligence briefs. And we know how politicized U.S. intelligence has been. We don't know exactly what they're saying now, but we know how politicized and incorrect it has been. Mm-hmm. But the politicians are still reading and largely going by the narrative of the media, right? So you see that this is all a propaganda, unreality, negative feedback loop, with the U.S.'s own propaganda, generated, pumped through Ukraine, pumping back through, and informing politicians to make even worse foreign policy decisions, right? On this whole affair. It is a disreality complex. It is truly, Orwell, he didn't have the half of it. He didn't have the half of it.
Yeah, it was insane. Like I said, I've never seen anything like it. Let me ask you this. So Zelensky recently was given an interview, and I guess there are a few things. One, when Donald Trump pointed out Zelensky needs to go into elections, well, apparently Zelensky freaked out a little bit, effectively pointed out, Ukraine needs a seat at the table for any negotiations that take place. But he also pointed out, he says there's $100 billion of U.S. taxpayer money that seems to have disappeared. He said, I don't know where all of this money is. Now, I've pointed out before, if you send $280 billion, even if you lose $1 billion, that is going to be difficult to find, right? That's so much money that you're sending in weapons, money, intelligence, etc., that losing a few billion, even though it's a huge amount of money, may not necessarily be the easiest thing to kind of track and get your hands on. So, but that's a lot of money. $100 billion is an astonishing amount of money. And Zelensky has said something like this once before, that like he only got half of the money or half of what the U.S. said that they were going to give him. What do we know about this? This is just corruption, right? Where money is just falling through a floor somewhere.
Okay, so a lot of it is actually, a lot of it when politicians say things like money that's intended for Ukraine. First of all, there's a certain above board level of all of it, right? Because a lot of that was so simply actually earmarked as, when it was presented as aid for Ukraine, as investment in the U.S. military industrial complex, and that would aid Ukraine. So when a lot of it is evoked like that, it was never actually intended to go to Ukraine. It was billed that way, but even on paper, right, official paper, it was supposed to be invested in the United States.
I see.
That's some of it, right? Now, obviously, we know that there is a high degree of corruption built into the U.S. military and intelligence complex, right? It siphons money away from everything, right? Redirects it for its own purposes. There has been a lot, I believe, provided to Ukraine that has been off the books, right?
Which they may find in an investigation, by the way.
Maybe they'll find some of it. Do I ever believe they'll find any of it? Some of it has been redirected to other conflicts and other countries. There's no question. But yes, corruption is built into the U.S. military industrial complex, and it's simply considered the norm, right? It's accepted, right? It's corruption when other countries do it, but when the U.S. does it, it's perfectly normal and legal because it's the U.S. It's not questioned. So how much actually ended up, you can understand why a lot of Kiev regime officials would be upset by that. If it's how much of it is true, I can't say, because that's less for them to steal, right? Off of what the smaller percentage that then goes on to their forces fighting, right? But I mean, it's kind of really ridiculous. Kettle black, pot calling black, and trying to point fingers at the U.S. at this point is really, it just smacks of desperation. It really does. Yes, it's to some degree, it's probably true. To some degree, it's probably true, but it's just desperation at this point. I don't really, at this point, I don't really think it's that salient. I mean, it's all crooked, it's all corrupt on both sides. I matter more what's happening on the battlefield.
Yeah, it's
a whole idea that either in the U.S. or in the Kiev regime in Ukraine that there's going to be any transparency or accountability is laughable. So.
Yeah, I mean, this kind of goes to what Trump said about Joe Biden one day. He said, all of these people that Joe Biden pardoned going all the way back since the beginning of the Ukraine war. He says, in the end, it might have been, how did he say it? I'm paraphrasing, but he should have pardoned himself. Effectively saying that Joe Biden might have been doing something illegal or something he didn't have any business doing.
Let's have a moment of honesty here, because while I would enjoy seeing quite a few U.S. officials from the blob, from U.S. aid and other agencies, being sent to trial and being locked up, I would enjoy that. But let us have a moment of honesty with ourselves that the entire U.S. Legal and justice system has been politicized and weaponized. And now whenever a new administration comes in, we just see the process of lawfare, where they utilize the law selectively as a weapon against their political opponents. That has become the norm whenever there's a change in power now in Washington, right? That is, it happened against Trump. Now Trump is reversing it around, and he's sure to escalate it up to biblical proportions against his opponents. And I won't mind, right? I'm not, but that's not to say that it's in its totality actually law or justice. It's a political weapon at this point.
No, I agree with you. To a certain extent. I mean, it depends, right? Like, if you're getting rid of 51 intelligence officials and you're saying, okay, I'm removing your security clearances. And like one of the leaked documents that recently came out showed that behind the scenes, they were in communication saying, this is going to provide cover for Joe Biden during the debate. And so they effectively use their security clearance to lie in this kind of mass psyop to the American public. I have zero issue with them taking it out.
I mean, I don't either. I mean, I'm happy to see the American political establishment eat itself alive, as it should. And whatever games Trump is playing with foreign policy, and there is a lot of interesting games and a lot of mafia tactics, at Panama and Colombia and attempted at other countries going on. He's going to war with the deep state. I mean, there are huge purges, right? U.S. aid. I mean, they're openly talking about shutting it down.
That's what I wanted to hit with you before you go also. The USA thing has been fascinating to me.
USA is code for regime change op central, right? I mean, that's what it is.
Right there.
It's not the only player in that, but it is the big player, right?
National Endowment for Democracy is another one. I mean, I've never seen a situation where they've put a circle around the fact that we have been knocking over governments using like funneling money through these organizations in order to pull that off. RFK just gave this sit down with Tucker Carlson where he brought up how U.S. aid was used to overthrow the government of Ukraine in 2014. And I'm sitting there like, why?
Yeah, there has been open evidence of U.S. aid involved in this in, regime change attempts in Cuba and elsewhere, covered in the Western media for years now. Just no one cared.
Yep.
No one, and the reason is primarily because it's his opponents. Do you believe that Trump is against using U.S. intelligence organs to overthrow other governments? No. It's that this was weaponized in part against him.
Right there.
Right? That's why he's against it, right? If he organizes something once again to try to overthrow the government of Venezuela, that's fine, right? That's why I say that this is politicized and weaponized. And I'm happy to see any part of the blob eat any other part of the blob alive. But let's just not fall into the projection belief that Trump is a good guy, right?
Oh, dude, we're well beyond. Yeah, we're well beyond the pale.
Genocide gone now, right? He officially earns that moniker.
Yeah, we're well beyond the pale on that one. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, Trump tried to use U.S. aid to overthrow the government of Venezuela. Like that wasn't, during his own term.
Wasn't tried in that. Yeah. So that's
what I'm fascinated.
He's going after political. He's purging the Treasury, the Defense Department, the State Department. He is firing people left and right. Anyone who he made a list over all these years of anyone who ever said or did anything against him, and they're all gone. I mean, the blob is going to. There is going to be an enormous influx of professors, right, in poli-sci and other, economics and other things at U.S. universities, which is usually where these officials go, when they're off in a political cycle, or, alternatively to the business community, though that's more Republican territory than for the Democrat bureaucratic officials, right, in the blob. But I mean, we're grab the popcorn. This is Trump's real war. This is the war that Trump wants to fight, even more than a war with China. It's a war against the blob that waged war on him since he was running for office the first time. This is payback. This is mafia, blood on the walls, right? A political warfare going on in DC. This is
I've never seen anything like it. Like, not where the guy gets in office and decides they tried to destroy me and I'm going to return the favor. And
the last time this happened, I will shatter the
shattered CIA.
I will scatter the CIA to the winds, right, in 1,000 pieces. And they killed him, right? Well, there have been 2 assassination attempts, at least thus far, on Trump. We'll see how much further he gets with this before someone decides that some crazy lone wolf person is going to.
How successful do you think he's going to be with this? I'm curious. I mean, like I'm trying to separate these two into 2 different sections.
Yeah.
Decide that's okay. This is legit. You're trying to affect an agenda that all of these people are effectively going to be against you, especially in foreign policy sense. And then there's the other side of these are just political grudges, political grinds, axes to grind. I'm taking off axes to grind for a moment because I'm never going to be okay with that. Yeah. From the standpoint of I want to affect an agenda. In order for me to affect this agenda, I need certain people in various spots as opposed to people backstabbing me.
You're way too idealistic there, right there. I mean, you're way too principled and idealistic for DC right there. I mean, it's always about political axes to grind. And you should be happy when the axe falls and the head that is beheaded benefits you in any way possible. You should be more cynical about that in that regard.
Yeah.
Do I think he's going to be successful? I will say I don't know because I'm 20 years outside of the US and have never been in the Beltway, right? I've never been a part of K Street, and other things. But I will say that he's obviously much better organized, and there's a plan this time. There are other people. It's just not him and former General Ryan Flynn going up against the deep state, right? I mean, he's got a whole apparatus. There's a plan. It was being enacted from minute 1, right? I mean, as soon as he was inaugurated, there were people going, go, 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 right? And the executive orders being repealed and, the stop work orders and the firings and the purgings, right? And the suspensions. It's been going on, like a tidal. In fact, the tidal wave is still building. Actually, right? So there's people. there is an apparatus. There is a plan behind it this time, right? I mean, he was the literal Santa Claus taking names, right? He's got a naughty list, right? You know, that you were naughty against me. That is, I mean, enormous. And he's going through it, right? Checking it twice. And he's going to get all those naughty little boys and girls in the beltway, you know, inside and outside of it, right? Ultimately, he's going up against so much. It is so huge. It is so powerful. It has been in motion for so long. We just over the weekend, right before the weekend, we heard Mark Rubio, right, himself a dyed in the wool neocon, right? Get in an interview with Megyn Kelly, just come out and say outright, the unipolar moment is over. Yep. We need to return to the policy of diplomacy, which the U.S. abandoned under previous administrations. Diplomacy was seen because we are morally and systemically superior, under the supremacist messianic ideology of exceptionalism, that we don't talk to our enemies. We don't need to talk to them, right? It would sully us to talk to them. We only talk when you kowtow to us, when you bandwagon to us. The diplomacy was not something that you do with your adversaries, right? I mean, that was why even the New York Times has now said that Antony Blinken was a secretary of war, right?
What?
I said it. I said it on this show. How many times? Now even the New York Times agrees with me that under Blinken, the top diplomat of the country, the State Department became a Department of War, right? They just didn't do diplomacy. Rubio says we need to do diplomacy with the other great powers now. That alone is enormous,
that is
right?
astonishing.
It is a watershed narrative change. Now, the Western media is still largely ignoring it because they don't know how to process that. They're still drunk on the unipolar moment, right? They're obviously starting to feel the pangs of hangover, right? But they're still drunk on it, right? And we're already really a decade past it at this point, certainly past its, high water mark. But that admission alone, and it was Mark Rubio who said those words.
Of all people. Right? Yeah.
I mean, I still am too cynical to believe that he's actually undergone a Damascene conversion, right? And recognized reality. I think he's playing his part for his political future, right? But even those things have a way of internalizing themselves, right? There's so many interesting things happening, right? I've been laser focused on what's been happening on the battlefield in Ukraine and in Kiev over the last few years, with an occasional nervous glance over towards Syria, right? I took my eye off that ball like everyone did, right? There's no question there. But now there's so much happening so fast in DC, and the battles there are obviously political, not, but there's blood on the walls in DC all the same. They're the real war, the real dynamic war. And that's not to say that any results of it, even if Trump won, would be good, because that would simply be abandoning what he sees as cost ineffective pursuit of hegemony and primacy. Right. What he wants is there's too many people out there in the alt media who are projecting themselves onto Trump, right? Their own beliefs, their own hopes onto Trump, right? Trump is not looking for a constructive place for the U.S. to play in a multipolar world order. Trump, he's moving away from the pursuit of hegemony and primacy under conventional terms to old school imperialism, where he's entrenching down and saying everything in the Western Hemisphere is mine.
Right.
Right. And I'm still going to play around in Israel and elsewhere as well, right? Obviously he intends to, but he's entrenching down on what he believes is his. That's old school imperialism, right?
Yeah,
That's
years of influence.
right. So
It's like
that,
Russia and China going to have theirs. This is ours.
yeah, you can find benefit, you can exploit that as an opponent, but let's not pretend for a moment that that is a beneficent or a good thing, right?
No,
It's
this is
just
weird.
a chaos bomb. It's
Yeah.
just chaos bomb. The chaos bomb is going off, and as I hope, it's going off on DC right now. It's going off on the transatlantic relationship. First was this thing with, yeah, Denmark is ours. You can either sell it to us or we're going to take it, right? That was the first one. But now the tariff war, Trump's tariff stick. Mexico, tariffs for you. Canada, tariffs for you. China, yeah, I see you over there laughing. Tariffs for you. Oh, EU, you want some? Bam, 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 tariff stick. I mean, Trump,
What do you think he's after with those? I got to be honest. This seems like the dumbest trade war that I've ever seen. And give me your take on that. What do you think he's trying to get? Like, I get the pressure.
He's said it openly before, right? He's talked about this. He talked about it all the way back in his first administration, right? Mm-hmm. He keeps talking about this American golden age, right? In Trump's mind, someone, whether it was something he read or someone, imprinted on him, he believes that the time period of the U.S. presidency of William McKinley was the economic golden age of the United States, when the U.S. was climbing to power among industrial nations to number one, largely not through globalization and free trade, but through the use of a really big tariff stick, right? And Trump has, for whatever reason, gravitated that this is the American geoeconomic and geopolitical solution rolled into one.
To what? I guess that's my, like if you're talking to an economist, let's say Richard Wolff, he would say the empire is on decline, and all of these moves are ways of trying to slow the decay, or at the very least to try to find, like you said, this golden age. By using
He's trying to bring manufacturing back to the United States, right? Which is hopeless, right? It's hopeless. I mean, it's well beyond that, I think, at this point. I mean, at least in terms, of mass consumer items and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And he is a business person in a political and geopolitical role. So he looks at the problem and the solutions through a completely different prism, and probably an incorrect. That's not to say that what was existing before worked. It didn't, right? But this also is not likely to work, and in upsetting the balance is likely to lead to even more catastrophe. But like I said, from over here, it's just pass the popcorn. I mean, I'm sorry.
Bizarre.
He is in a full-scale tariff war with his own Western allies.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And it's the tidal effects. We saw hints of it in his first administration, but there was a lot more obstacles from the Senate, from the intelligence. He's waging war against all those obstacles at home at the same time as he is going about his grand vision of being president, Donald McKinley. It's fascinating. Trying to understand what's going on in Trump's head is of course, I don't know, and I have to say that I don't know, but he's thrown enough obvious comments repeated enough times to be able to pick up, an occasional trace of where his thought process is going. Yeah, it's pretty obvious, I think, in this case, that's where the thing is that he's managed to collect together a group of people whom he has either convinced or managed, to direct them towards that endeavor, and they are at least, committed to it.
They're falling in line. Yeah.
Right? Yeah. I mean, there's a plan, there's a policy, there's a process. There is an apparatus going about the pursuit of this, and it is a new, hugely unorthodox, like a heresy, grand strategic vision for the U.S. Economic, political, geopolitical, social. Right there, he's just throwing all the LGBTQ transsexual stuff out completely out the window. Right? You know, I mean, it's all gone.
I will say this.
He's attempting to completely change the United States, right? In remake it in his own vision, however distorted that is, and simply this may break America in the process.
I think it will be
the best result.
There will be some serious economic consequences. Like this notion that bricks didn't come out of nowhere. Like bricks didn't come out of a vacuum. It was policies that Trump is effectively doing now. And this was kind of like, okay, we're going to pass sanctions on the rest of the world, and the rest of the world feels some kind of way about these kind of unilateral sanctions, or America moralizing while being hypocrites at the same time. Okay, he has taken the mask off. Like, you know, we're not allies, we're not friends, you're our vassals, and we will extract and colonize you every bit as much as you colonize all of these other places. It is astonishing. Like I said, I've never seen anything like it. So we will see how
the last time was, you know, that time that he imagines was the golden age, when America wasn't even shy about, you know, its imperial role, you know, in the Western Hemisphere and around the world. So it's refreshing in a way. It's entertaining. Yeah. I mean, it is like watching if not an HBO production, then at least a Netflix one.
To give him a little bit of credit, I would say there's something. Oh man, I don't want this to come across sounding wrong. There's something good about a president winning an election and saying, I'm going to fulfill my campaign objectives. And in order to fill those objectives, even if I have to step on people's toes to do it, then I'm going to do it. The issue is it's what he's doing. Like it's him and I have different priorities in regards to what I think is going to be right or correct. But it's more so like many of these other presidents that came in were just milquetoast. Like, you know, it was like a placeholder. Joe Biden was just a placeholder. I mean, he could have been a dead body and would have effectively been as effective as he was in that office. Whereas, as you point out, Trump had a plan. He was far more organized. He was far more diligent. He decided to take on wars all across the globe. And I mean, political fights, even among countries that he considered to be allies. And some of these he's winning. I mean, Venezuela ends up taking back its people. Colombia ends up taking back its people. Panama apparently stopped working with China.
Yeah, Denver. I mean, it's just outright. Yeah. Yeah. That one belt, one road stuff, you're going to stop cooperating with the Chinese completely, or we're going to break your economic legs. Yeah. I mean, it's that outright, right? But it's done exactly that way. And Panama, you know, they
capitulate.
China doesn't have that type of geopolitical influence, right? Mm-hmm. You know, in the Western Hemisphere. So it's, in my mind, it's trading one unworkable, aberrant geopolitical vision for the United States as hegemon for another aberrant, unworkable geopolitical vision of the United States as first among imperial great powers. But it is my hope is not that he will succeed, because I don't believe he ultimately ever could, but that the chaos in the transition from one to the other and all the internal and external conflicts that will revolt from that will break the U.S. grip on the world such as it is now in the process. That's the chaos bomb. The chaos bomb right now is going off in some of the best possible places.
Yeah, I'll let you go, Mark, but it would have to, by definition, right? I mean, on the positive side, him looking at this as spheres of influence would mean he cares about other big countries or other powers. So Russia, China, these will be countries to negotiate with. Hell, maybe even Iran. Europe, not so much.
No, Europe is not a great power. They're just a vassal to the United States, and they need to get in line. Yeah. That's, I mean, there's this whole the whole talk right now is that the fear, the very real fear in Kiev and in Brussels and in London and Berlin and elsewhere, that that Trump could come to a deal with Russia over Ukraine and never involve the Europeans or the Kiev regime in Ukraine at all, and just say, this is what we've agreed to, you got to accept it, right? I mean, that fear is, I don't know how real that is, but that fear is gripping Kiev and Brussels and London right now, right?
Would you have any doubt that he would deliver this kind of fait accompli? I mean, as you pointed out, part of the reason he wants to get rid of Zelensky, I would imagine, is because, you know, he's a stone in the process. He wants to get rid of him.
Yeah, he's a stone in the process. He doesn't like Zelensky. He doesn't like the regime there. And he just doesn't give a flying F about Ukraine. It's not on his priority list. That said, he still can't hand it to Putin on a silver platter. So we'll see. We'll see what comes out of it. Yep.
Mark Sleboda, international relations security analyst. You can follow Mark on Twitter at Mark Sleboda1. You can find him on his YouTube channel at Real Politic with Mark Sleboda. And you can also find him on Facebook at facebook.com/Gramsci. Mark, man, always appreciate talking to you, my man. And you're right. We've been damn more right than any of these other creatures in the media. So shout out to you, my man. Have a good one, Mark.
Cheers.